Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our DAT IQ Weekly Market Update. This is our update for November 22nd, 2022. It's officially hate week here in Ohio as we prepare to play that team up north on Saturday, hence my garb. But besides that, I'm Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics over here at DAT, joined by Dean Croak, who's our Principal Industry Analyst, and Nicole Glenn, who is President and CEO of Candor Expedited. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I just rolled out of bed and decided to put all this on, normal day, normal Tuesday in Ohio.
You never know with you. It might be.
How do you go with Buckeyes so close to you like that? They're supposed to be deadly, right?
It's a risk I'm willing to take, to be honest. A lot of people like to point out that the Buckeye mascot may not be the most fear-inducing mascot, but I would venture to guess that more people throughout history have died from eating Buckeyes than a duck. Just saying. Or a Wolverine. Have you ever even seen a Wolverine? No one's seen an actual Wolverine, right? I mean, come on. They might be vicious, but they're not very popular. No. So anyway, what's going on with you, Nicole? Do you mind giving everyone who's new to the show a quick intro and update on what you have going on?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Glenn. Like Ken said, I'm the CEO and founder of Candor Expedite. I've been a lucky lady in logistics for almost 23 years, guys. I'm close.
Wow.
And so I'm the owner and founder of Candor, which is a company that specializes in time-sensitive and really sensitive shipping across the country with really small size equipment, burner van, straight trucks, up to team, tractor trailer, air. Now we added air to the menu this past July. So we're an IAC, as well as doing first and final mile in the space. So started the company in 2017 and we've been in growth mode. It's, as we all say in logistics, the crazy world of chaos that brings happiness to my soul. So I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, and I wanted to, Nicole was at our DATCon user conference back in October, one of our more well-attended and highest rated sessions, so I'm really thankful. We try to have her on at least once a quarter just because we get so many questions and so much interest about the expedite and specialty space that she's here to answer. So with that, I'm going to get into the key points of the week, and I promise they're not all related to the game on Saturday, just a few of them. So let's get to those key points of the week. So national average spot rates are flat last week, trending about 17 cents a mile above 2019. I think that's going to be the really important number to watch as we sort of progress here over the next 6 to 10 weeks. Active and replacement rates for van and reefer continue to trend downward, with new contract rates averaging 14 to 16% below the retired rates. Again, we expect that. We can't get to a bottom until we see contract rates bottom. You can hear me now? Okay, that was probably a Michigan fan that did that. So moving on, I will go a few rows here. So just speaking about contract rates, they need to bottom out before we get to spot rates. Market starting to flip. The 10-mile index from Michigan State. The one thing I was going to mention here before my audio cut out was that I would caution folks who pay too much attention to pure spot volumes. Volumes could be up. We could be seeing a PT season happening in contract rate that wouldn't manifest and looking at a pure spot indicator. We look at indexes like Michigan State, our total truckload volume index, CAS to look at total holistic market volumes. So just something to keep in mind. New single-family housing starts are down 6% month over month in October. Christmas tree peak shipping season is underway. Specifically, capacity falls and Class 8 truck orders at auction turn negative year over year. No purge. Nice little comment there from Dean. I will turn it over to him for our market update.
Yes, thanks, Ken. Let's go through the market update this week. Remember, folks, you can download our weekly market update at dat.com/market update. That'll be up tonight. So let's start with dry van. Load post volumes last week followed seasonal trends, down 13% in the lead up to Thanksgiving. No surprise there. Volumes do remain about 44% lower than this time last year. Capacity tightened slightly last week, but the number of carriers posting their equipment in search of loads is now 17% higher than this time last year. That's a sign, of course, that the spot market capacity is still oversupplied. Carrier equipment posts remained at record high levels last week for the middle of November, and about 5% higher than when demand crashed in the middle of April 2020. Load to truck ratio up slightly to 2.43 last week. In refrigerated, no surprise to see load post take off last week with all the turkeys and Christmas trees moving. Volumes are up 13% week over week. Of course, a lot of shippers are moving inventory into retail markets. A lot of Christmas trees have to be in parking lots by next Monday, so we're in the middle of peak shipping week as we go to air. Volumes are about half, though, what they were this time last year. Carrier equipment posts, one of the components of the load to truck ratio, are about 11% higher over the same time frame year over year. Load to truck ratio up to 5.26 last week. Load posts in the flatbed market relatively flat last week, although the overall trend is down still. Flatbed volumes in the spot market have decreased by about 21% in the last month and remain 67% lower than this time last year. Compared to mid-November in 2018, which was a good year for flatbed carriers, spot market volume is still 54% higher than that year. That's a good indicator of how strong the industrial economy is at the moment. However, we've got some headwinds, I suspect, in the first quarter as we head through the Christmas period into January. Equipment posts, though, remained at record high levels last week, and even 7% higher than the prior record set in October 2019. Load to truck ratio up slightly to 8.84. Having a look at our market condition index around the country, a little bit of a focus on Christmas trees. That's some of the big volume moving right now. According to the American Christmas Tree Association, everyone will be able to find a Christmas tree this year, unlike last year. Demand for Christmas trees is strong. Outbound freight volumes in the Pacific Northwest and the Pacific Maritimes in Canada reflect that. In Portland, it's the largest producer of Christmas trees. Spot market volumes up 11% last week, making it the fourth week of gains. Outbound spot rates in Portland spiked last week, up 11 cents a mile to $1.43. Remember, these rates are excluding fuel, so you'd have to add the fuel surcharge to that. Portland to Stockton, one of the busier lanes for dry van carriers. Load posts were up slightly last week. Rates increased slightly to $1.03 per mile. Not spectacular rates for a backhaul market, and about 50 cents a mile lower than this time last year. Having a look at the broader Pacific Northwest region, outbound regional rates increased 8 cents a mile. They're just 5 cents a mile higher than in 2016 and almost $1 a mile lower than this time last year. On the East Coast, in the second largest Christmas tree market, North Carolina, rates are up 3 cents a mile to an average outbound rate of $1.69. Having a look at the West Coast market, it continues to soften. Spot rates dropped for the fourth week in a row to $1.72 a mile for all outbound loads. That's down 13 cents a mile in the last 4 weeks. And one of the busy lanes that's been reflective of the import volumes that have been rising and decreasing of late is the Los Angeles to Stockton lane. It's a big warehouse market. Spot rates at $2.44 a mile last week are at the lowest level in the last 12 months and about $1.56 a mile lower than this time last year. Another lane that retail volumes have been moving on was Los Angeles to Phoenix. That followed a similar trend at $2.56 a mile, almost $2 a mile lower than this time last year. Having a look at the refrigerated market, long-haul shippers of Christmas trees that send loads into warmer states often require reefers, which at this time of the year pushed up outbound reefer line haul rates in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon by 20 cents a mile last week to an average of $2.23. Compared to this time last year, this regional rate is almost $1 a mile lower and identical to what it was in 2018. Reefer loads from Portland to Los Angeles, they surged last week to $2.40 a mile, up $1 a mile compared to October. Lots of tight capacity on that lane and about 45 cents a mile higher than this time last year. That's Portland to Los Angeles. Nearby Pendleton, big refrigerated market for apples and pears this time of the year, and Christmas trees. Capacity was tight last week, following a 65 cents a mile month-over-month increase to an average outbound rate of $2.58. Loads to Phoenix were flat at $2.17. Capacity was tight in Louisiana last week. Reefer rates increased by 55 cents a mile for all outbound loads to an average of $2.48, still lower by almost the same amount compared to this time last year. And on the southern border in Laredo and McAllen markets, reefer rates increased for the fourth week to $2.13, up 11 cents a mile over the October average. At $1.81 a mile, long-haul reefer rates from Laredo to Los Angeles are 15 cents a mile higher than this time last year and up about 30 cents a mile in the last month. Loads from Lakeland to Laredo to Lakeland at 262, or up 11 cents a mile above the 6-month average of 251. Having a look at flatbed now. Flatbed carriers also get in on the Christmas tree action. Takes an enormous amount of time to unload Christmas trees. Capacity tightening again in the same sorts of markets you'd expect: Oregon, North Carolina, Idaho, and Maine for flatbed carriers. In those 4 states, combined spot rates are up 10 cents a mile last week to an average of $2.38. As a sign of how loose capacity is, though, in flatbed, that's 48 cents a mile lower than this time last year, and almost identical to what the line haul rate was in those 4 states in 2018. Capacity was tight in the southeast in Jacksonville last week. It's a large flatbed market. For carriers, capacity tightened following a 48 cents per mile increase in spot rates to an average of $2.38 a mile last week. Load posts were up 15%. A lot of volume was moving on a short haul 200-mile lane to Lakeland. Rates are up $31 a load to $6.17. In Nashville, flatbed volumes increased 25% week over week. Outbound rates up 17 cents a mile to $2.84. And in Houston, consistently the largest flatbed spot market in DAT's network, loads moved north to Fort Worth out of Houston were flat last week. Spot rates hit a 12-month low at $2.56. Export loads to El Paso out of Houston up 2% last week, while capacity loosened on this lane. And at $2.23 for the 750-mile run, flatbed rates are almost 70 cents a mile lower than this time last year. And wrapping up our market update with a year-over-year look at spot rates, dry van line haul spot rates flatlined last week at a national average of $1.71, but remained 32%, or about 80 cents a mile lower than this time last year. Dry van rates have dropped $1.07. Remember, these are line haul rates excluding fuel, have dropped $1.07 per mile since the start of the year, and are approximately 11 cents per mile lower than this time in 2017 and 2019. The national average line haul rate is about 30 cents per mile lower than DAT's top 50 dry van lanes for loads moved, which averaged $2.01 last week. In refrigerated and going against seasonal trends, reefer line haul rates were flat last week at a national average of $2.08. The typical pre-Thanksgiving November increase in reefer spot rates from the start of November to Thanksgiving is about 13 cents a mile for the first 3 weeks. That's going back over the last 5 years. This year, reefer rates have remained flat for the first 3 weeks of the month, an indication of how soft demand is and how oversupplied the reefer market is. Last week's reefer line haul rate was about 94 cents a mile lower than this time last year. And wrapping up our market update with flatbed, line haul rates decreased a penny per mile last week to a national average of 203. Compared to this time last year, last week's average spot rate is 21%, or 53 cents a mile lower, and now identical to line haul rates in 2017 for the 3rd week of November. And with that, it's over to Ken for the short-term forecast.
Thank you, Dean. We seem to have the audio fixed, and I do again apologize for that. We have a little bit of an equipment malfunction. All right, so national dry van spot rate forecasts. So for those new to the show, those new to this chart, the blue line is the historical 7-day weighted moving average spot line haul rate for dry vans in this case. It's excluding fuel. This is a baseline haul rate. And as you can see, we've been trending downward here over the last few weeks. And then you see some colorful lines. Those colorful lines to the right-hand side of the chart represent 4 different forecast models, which together make up our forecast ensemble. We have green, which is our flagship raycast model; red, which is a short-term model, which more heavily weights near-term data, tends to overreact based on near-term data. And then you have a yellow and a gray line, which are blends of the two in different degrees and amounts. And as we've been talking about ad nauseum on this program, the short-term and the raycast model seem to be in some disagreement. We've been inching towards the point where they're going to disagree. We seem to be there now. I will tell you, over the last couple of weeks, the short-term model has been a little bit more accurate than raycast, but this is where we'll really see over the next 3 to 4 weeks which model prevails. One thing I do find interesting and worth mentioning in this chart is that now that we're starting to bring forward more of those out months, getting closer and closer to the actual Christmas holiday, pretty much all the models are going to start to show rates going upwards. That is probably the strongest seasonal push of the entire year. So it's just something to be mindful of as we inch toward that date. Moving next to reefer, you're going to see a very similar thing. The raycast model is bringing some of that run up in price forward, right around the 2nd week for between the first and second week of December. The near-term models pushing that out all the way to the week before the Christmas holiday. Moving last to flatbed, a little less disagreement here. You don't tend to see as much of a seasonal push. If anything, it's just driven by drivers going out of service and reduced capacity. You're seeing the middle two models very much in alignment about what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And then you're seeing Ratecast and the short-term model disagree a little bit, but again, not nearly as much as the other two equipment types. So with that, we are going to turn it to Dean for our question of the week.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, question for Nicole. Is peak season significantly different for expedited and specialized equipment?
I love this question because I always think of transportation as like domino effects, right? When we see something happen, I mean, anything that goes, it's just this ripple effect across the entire industry. Right. And so, yes, it is definitely a part of our expectation when peak season comes that companies like ourselves start seeing that. I think the biggest spot that really hits that is really LTL, right? So whenever there's a capacity crunch or, manufacturers are producing more and they need to get that product to the delivery destinations, we're starting to see, customers having shorter lead time right. when they're doing that. And then obviously LTL not being able to accommodate the moves. And so you're then starting to fall into the sprinter straight truck category. And so one of the things too, especially when the market tightens, what we see is a lot of our clients start looking for cost savings. And we've been hearing that, quite few of the LTL companies have been coming back to them, reviewing some of their heavyweight areas and, putting a pretty big invoice on them. So we spent some time too educating clients that just because the terminology of expedite is there, I always love to explain to everybody of the non-expedite expedite, which supplies that capacity when something's maybe a little too heavy for LTL, causing those highly increased invoices, but still not requiring a full truckload, but giving that dedicated service. So we see an uptick with that type of freight too in peak season.
So I remember, when I was on the expedite side of the house, the busiest time was that Black Friday, those consumer durables, right? Whether they be appliances or furniture, things like that. And to your point, it was just sort of freight that the big truckload carriers and LTL carriers didn't want to mess with. And it was time definite, right? It wasn't day or kind of day definite like you get with some of the big truckload carriers. Is that still, has that persisted through COVID?
It definitely has. It's something that we've seen, and we've also positioned ourselves. I don't know about any other listeners that are in our space to really focus on that milk run model. So starting to help a lot of retailers with those short hauls, from a distribution to maybe 5 or 6 delivery locations into stores. So we have definitely seen that strong for us, for sure.
Nicole, do you typical this week we see capacity tighten as truckload carriers want to get their drivers home, so they kind of shorten their radius of operation so they can meet the home time requirements. Do you see a similar trend in LTL expedited?
Yes and no. We have a lot of folks in the expedited side of things that aren't necessarily celebrating Thanksgiving. So with that, we still have an abundance of drivers that are on the road, not born and raised folks that care about Thanksgiving and turkey on the table. So, if we would put a load out there on Thursday, you're still getting bombarded with capacity of people who want to move that business. Christmas is a little different when we start getting to that holiday, but Thanksgiving, it's still ready to go with capacity consistently.
The pattern we used to experience was you'd find, especially, folks of global descent, they would typically take shorter, fewer, longer breaks. And the end of the year was that most popular time for that. So they may work through holidays that we would typically celebrate, like an Easter or a 4th of July or a Thanksgiving, and then maybe take an entire month off from middle December to middle January.
For sure.
Because if you're going to fly 24 hours somewhere or kind of take an extended visit, even if you're driving, you better make it worth it, right?
For sure. And then there's some cultures that actually have a different day of Christmas. A lot of European celebrate a different time. So with that, they're rearing and ready to go during our holidays that we have, for sure.
Yeah. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot, back to the Expedite side is, and I wanted to ask you was, are you seeing any sort of preparations for a potential rail disruption? I mean, we thought it went away when they agreed in principle a month or whatever, however long ago that was. And now you're starting to see kind of not universal ratification of that agreement, which if you talk to a lot of rail folks, they're getting real itchy about the potential of a disruption. Are you seeing that? Shippers making preparations?
No, not actually this time as of yet. The last time, the day of or the day before, we started getting notifications from some of our clients, but it has been radio silent on communication for that now. Haven't had anyone reach out to say, hey, be ready. But I think it's more of the mindset of who really reaches out to their expediter. They just kind of count on you to be there, right? So we're the last folks that would get notification of that, but the first ones to try to dive in and help when they need that.
I mean, so I guess I'll pivot to the second part of that question. You opened the show with talking about your experience in the freight space. What do you think about the impending rail Armageddon that may happen?
Well, I mean, like anything. I mean, like I said, even in my first statement of domino effects, right? We just see that as going down the pipe in different directions and impacting the supply chain across. I have not been educated enough to go back and really dive in and read anything else. I think I've been on the road more than anything as of late. So I haven't been tuned in on everything that's going on with it. So you're making me want to go back and look at it again and learn more, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I was reading some Ari Ash's stuff at JOC, and then I was talking to some contacts I have in the rail industry, and a lot of nervousness, right? I mean, a lot of the things they're hearing, the things they're seeing. What have you been hearing, Dean?
Similar. Talked to some railroad economists, good colleagues of mine that have their finger on the pulse. The relationships haven't changed between management and labor. They're still and I use a quote, at their worst they've ever seen them. These are railroad folks that have been in the industry for 50 and 60 years. So they're very experienced people, no longer actively involved in the railroad industry. But certainly they don't think they've ever seen it as bad as it is now, and think that there's a good chance that we'll end up with some form of stoppages, if not a full-on strike, because once one union pushes back, everybody else is expected to follow suit.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to have a personal connection that was an executive at one of the Class A railroads. And I guess the way that he expressed it, I'm going to try to recreate it in a way that makes sense. Even if they do come to terms to an agreement, based on how poor the relationship is, there's a lot of concern around that tenuous agreement holding, right? That they are so far apart and labor is so... extremely concerned about conditions, benefits, things like that. And when you hear these folks talk, I mean, especially the ones that have been around a long time, I mean, the average pay for across the board, the average for rail workers, everyone who's involved in the rail industry is over six figures. And I think it's probably the only industry where that you can actually say that to be the case. Because even in tech, you have people doing data entry and whatnot to pull it, the average down from the 25-year-old software developer making $500,000. So when you think about it, it's the unions are having a hard time generating sympathy for these folks that are on paper making, a very, very good living with a very, very good retirement package. But when you peel back the onion, I mean, it is still a dangerous job in a lot of cases. It's still long hours. They're doing a lot to justify those wages. And it's just, from a stats perspective, it's just when you have such pervasive contract bargaining, you just tend to see a tighter distribution of wages across the board, right? So it's an interesting problem. It's not a problem I think that most people are kind of used to facing on their day-to-day lives, or at least talking about.
And I think with it being so union heavy. I feel like a lot of people just don't feel heard in what they're trying to do, those conditions, and even taking the opportunity to apply. I mean, they work any sorts of hours that you can imagine. They'll change your schedule on a flip of a dime, and now your nights and overnights and weekends, and it's a constant change for these folks, and they are always adapting to what comes to them. And I think it's hard. And I think as that people are starting to see that other work environments are wanting to offer that and create that flexibility, the rails still seem to be a little archaic on how they manage people. And so that's going to have to catch up, even with empathy, right, for what people go through on their day-to-day work lives. And so
Yeah.
who knows what will happen
Yeah.
with that, you know? That's a tough one, and it's so big. You know, as we see like smaller companies, we have the ability to make an instant change, a ripple effect. I mean, these are humongous companies with just grandfathered concepts and ideas that just very archaic.
Yeah, you know, it's not just the rails either, right? I had like a absolute trip from hell this past week. I mean, the trip itself was great when I got there, but it was traveling more than I was there, and I went all the way to the West Coast and tried to pull that off in a 50-hour time span. But I noticed flying United, a huge amount of the workers, even the ones deadheading in street clothes, have on their bag contract first, United second. It was a tag that I saw probably 80 to 100 people have as I was going through Chicago and back through Denver. And then you see some of the kind of upheaval on the Delta side as well. I mean, I think they flat out rejected the latest agreement, right, Dean?
We're not able to hear Dean.
Yeah, I can't tell if it's. But yeah, I mean, that's what I remember from United was those tags, and then, you know, they're having some pretty extreme labor problems that they're dealing with. So I think as we, you know, when we talk about this freight cycle, and you heard a lot about this, right, Nicole, at DATCon, a lot of people talking about the cycle. The last two were clouded by these sort of exogenous events, right? ELDs in the 2017-18, and then COVID in this one. You know, my contention is maybe there's just going to be something every couple of years that whips the market into a frenzy, and we just have to like put an asterisk of like naming hurricanes,
yeah,
and naming winter storms. Now apparently we have to just start naming what drove the freight market into a frenzy that particular time, because this could be the rail-driven frenzy of 2023, right?
Yeah, very well could be.
And we're still not out of the woods yet with the West Coast Labour Agreement, which still hasn't been ratified. Ken, they had workers put a lockout on cranes this week and shut down the Portland operation for a day, I think. So there's all sorts of shenanigans going on there.
We will have to keep an eye on it all, that's for sure. All right, let's get to some listener questions. How's that sound?
Yep. First question from Nust Freight Dispatching, based on trucking data. When do we think we get this right? Trucking data. When do you think the spot market for Q3 2023 will get back to normal, or is this going to be another hard year coming for the trucking industry? So we're looking at the Q3 23 in a year's time. It's a long way off.
I'll ask Nicole why don't we start with Nicole so I don't bias her with my strong Ohioan perspective. What do you think? When do you think we're going to turn the corner on this freight cycle?
Oh my gosh, I actually think it could be around that time is when we start seeing more of that uptick again, unless this intermodal conundrum goes into play, right? But I think it could be around that time. I mean, we've seen just everything start to drop down, and even retailers, right? This overabundance of inventory. I think we're going to have a lot of people and companies that are going to proceed with caution. I also think that the media doesn't help all of this,
right.
To be honest with you. I mean, seeing all the articles too, Facebook laying off all of these folks, Convoy. I mean, you can keep going on the large companies that are just doing massive layoffs. And so what does that do to the small to mid-sized company? It creates this shockwave of fear that runs through our industry. So business leaders are making decisions differently than what they would if there wasn't such a heavy emphasis on it, in my opinion, too. Because I mean, it's every corner you turn, you are hearing these massive layoffs. So
yeah,
I think that touches it too, to be honest with you.
Yeah, a-holes like Elon Musk aren't helping out the the cross-cutting culture of tech at the moment. Take that one from firsthand experience. I'll say, I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think the tailwinds that we typically get in the spring around produce season and that kind of patio furniture and grills will help flip the market around. And I say that because I don't know that the spot market has too much more to give up before we get so far below kind of baseline operating costs that it becomes untenable. So my thinking has been rather consistent around end of Q1, early Q2, we see the market as a whole start to flip. But to do that, contract rates have to come down a considerable amount more to start that market cycle going in the other direction.
Well, isn't it part of a problem too? I'm sorry, I wanted to ask you one more thing, Ken. Because people are in RFQ season right now.
Yeah.
And so I've talked to some folks that are going at cost or below cost, holding something for a year with that mindset too. So that could impact. Yes, I mean, I've heard it more than once too. So that could technically impact contract rates being held so low this next year.
Yeah. I mean, I think they need to go lower, right? I mean, if we could have snapped our fingers in July or August and had contract rates meet spot, I think we'd already be experiencing the next freight. I mean, the reason this is taking longer is because it takes contract rates longer to come down. My thinking that kind of backs up why I'm a little more confident than I probably should be about end of Q1, early Q2 is this RFP season will be robust. You'll get the new rates that'll get put into place over the new year. And then that will kind of put the final nail in the coffin of the pandemic freight cycle, because the contract rates will come down to meet spot, and then we'll start to kind of progress back upwards in the spring to early summer. But we'll see if shippers are not getting the rate concessions they need, they might go out for a rebid in the spring, which could prolong this, and that would very likely push full recovery into Q3. But I mean, I don't think this is a controversial statement, Dean, but I don't think spot rates can stay this low for all of 2023 with diesel where it's at and have anything but an extreme impact on capacity.
Correct. This week, if you're running a long-haul truck business as an owner-operator small fleet, you're at about $2.05 a mile. So that includes 82 cents a mile for diesel, wages of 61 cents a mile, finance costs of 41 cents a mile. So you've got a lot of operating costs for a lot of new entrants are around the $2 per mile mark. Kyle makes a good point. If I was running a truck and owned my own truck and didn't have finance costs, I could run for about $1.70 a mile. That would be my break-even absolute lowest number, but I'm not getting any return on equity at that number. So the floor price to run a truck these days is probably for a lot of new entrants closer to $2 a mile. Anything less than that is going to have pretty big impacts on capacity coming into the new year. But I think there's a lot of owner-operators that have been through multiple cycles. They own their own equipment. They've come off a very, very profitable 2021 financial year, probably paid down a lot of debt, and can afford to run a little bit less than what current line haul rates are at about $1.70 a mile. But I don't know how long you can sustain that. At some point, you've got to be able to generate a profit and get back to, better rates.
Yeah, and I think that just dovetails. We can hit Contractors Corner's question about contract rates hitting a base. Right. I think that's what we're talking about, is that late Q1, Q2. Now, again, I think there's these people, the keyboard warriors that are nervously hitting F5 on their keyboard on CNBC, praying to God for a recession to manifest, especially in the media. Short of extreme macroeconomic calamity a la 2008, I feel pretty comfortable in that outlook of Q1 to Q2, maybe stretching into Q3 if it's a particularly slow growing season in the spring. But again, if we go into a housing crisis or something similar to 2008, that sort of takes most reasonable predictions off the table.
Yep.
Forecasts can only forecast things that are forecastable, right? What else do we have here? Do we see an increase in trucking demand since barging transportation and the low water issue on the Mississippi River?
It really didn't, Ken.
It's
really
mostly
didn't.
bulk, though, isn't it? We wouldn't have much visibility into like bulk grain.
Yep.
Have you seen anything, Nicole?
No, I haven't.
We didn't see anything on the bulk chemical or coil steel, for example. A lot of that moves by barge. We didn't really see anything in the flatbed or bulk sector.
Yeah, I just think it's something that's going to get caught up in some of the big national tonnage indices that we don't have granular visibility into, unfortunately. All right, one last one. Jacob Flint, how precise is load to truck ratio we can get to one hot zone and not find any money worth coming into the particular hot zone? So I will say it's extremely precise because it's the beauty in load to truck ratio is its simplicity. It's quite literally the number of load posts divided by the number of truck posts. If you're looking for a more scrubbed number, so that would be like your manual transmission. The more automatic transmission flavor of that would be the market conditions index that Dean uses for the show. And you can see it at DAT.com. Regarding the last point, and maybe Nicole can chime in on this, there's an extremely common behavior in the way that the intermediary market works, the brokerage market works, where a shipper will give what they call all brokerages have a different name for it, but we called it non-committed. So a shipper will go to, let's say, 5 brokers and say, I've got Joliet to Jackson, Mississippi, picking up today, 40,000 pounds, dry van, whatever, non-hazmat, single. So they offer it to 5 brokers, broker A, B, C, D, and E. And I don't want to say whoever covers it first, because that's not always the case. So whoever makes service and rate in an acceptable timeline, the shipper will grant that load to. But what it looks like from a load post perspective is all 5 brokers in high likelihood are posting that load to the load boards, trying to get it covered. Because the first one to get it covered at the right rate will likely get the shipment from the shipper. So that's why you might see the same actual shipment posted multiple times, but there's really no way to control for that. We don't have like bill of lading numbers or unique load identifiers all the way up into the shipper's TMS.
Right.
Does that still happen, Nicole? I have to imagine it does.
It does, and I thought your number of 5 was pretty low.
Oh, yeah.
We're seeing so many shippers give it to like 45 brokers. There's so many spot tools out there now that customers are using for their own internal load boards. And so it's a matter of what you said, Ken. It could be speed, it could be price. And then a lot of the brokers are trying to get to the best price possible and then working that down afterwards.
Yes.
Solidified. But a lot of the shippers are based upon how quickly can you get that rate in there, so that way they can move on to the next shipment that they have hitting their plate.
Yeah, so my 30-second soapbox before we go to plugs and sign off here is I hear all the time, I wish you could give me a pure load to truck ratio number. And I tell people to be careful what you ask for, because when the market's really, really tight, a la COVID, you might see 50 brokers getting a crack at a load from a shipper. In really, really slow markets, it might be 5 to 10, right? Because they don't need to blast it out to as many. They may trim their email distribution lists. And when you remove signal from a measure like load to truck ratio, you might not get as much value from it as you had previously. Now, I will fully disclose, if you don't know what to do with all of that signal, you're going to have a bad time. So maybe you use MCI or something like that. But if you have the capability to leverage the full power of something like load to truck ratio, or even like our search data, the truck and load search data that we have, then that's going to give you a lot more well-rounded understanding of what's happening in the market over and above pure loads and trucks. Because as we've seen time and time again, total truckload volumes don't change that much, right? Through COVID, through 19, the total number of all truckloads, if you had a crystal ball, doesn't change all that much. And when it does change, it's more a function, and again, this is my personal thing, Nicole and Dean can correct me, it's more a function of load factor, empty miles, length of haul, than it truly is like total demand, right? You don't flip a switch and have 10, demand from a pure demand perspective for 10% more truckloads. But if you're running 3% more empty miles and 10% shorter length of haul, and you're fitting 10% more air in the back of your trailer compared to freight, that's a 10% increase in demand because you have fewer supply, right? So it's just something to think about. All right, plugs, Dean.
Okay, yes, I'll be on Sales Chatter with Dan Deegan tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern. Robert Rouse is going to be on Landline Now Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. on Sirius XM. And then I'll be on Radio Nemo at 8 a.m. Eastern for a Thanksgiving special with Jimmy Mack, Sirius XM Channel 146 Road Dog. You can also find this week's market update at dat.com/market update or on our new IQ dashboard at iq.dat.com. And with that, it's back to Ken to wrap up the show.
All right, I want to thank Nicole for joining us this quarter. We hope to see her in the new year. Hope you have a safe and happy holiday, Nicole, and relax a little bit. You said you've been on the road a ton. And
yeah, probably not. This is pandemonium time for us, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's usually late January, February when us in transportation actually get to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
But so other than that, we will see everyone next. Our guest next week, Dean, I know you said it, just to remind everyone, is
Christina Ellington and our market research analyst.
I'm looking forward to that.
Season. Yeah.
All right. And I'm hoping for dry weather and a Buckeye win on Saturday. And with that, I hope everyone listening has a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And we hope to see you back next week. Bye, everyone.